Nicholas Winslow dedicated his life to constructing an empire, meticulously managing every facet of his domain with exactitude. Dominance, affluence, and authority, these were the sole pursuits of significance. Yet, on a typical afternoon at a prestigious golf course, everything shifted with merely 4 simple words spoken by 2 young children. "You are our father." Before him stood a boy and a girl, both no older than 6, their identical brown eyes gazing up at him, reflecting a blend of hope and uncertainty. He was unaware of their names. He had never encountered them before. And yet, there was an unmistakable sense of familiarity about them. For the first time in his life, Nicholas, relentless, unyielding, always commanding, felt utterly unready. If their words held any truth, then his existence was no longer solely his to claim. It was theirs as well. Nicholas Winslow had constructed his existence around meticulousness, mastery, and unwavering assurance. He was not the sort of man who embraced the unexpected. His existence centered on meticulously planned gatherings, high-stakes negotiations, and a steadfast regimen that ensured his continued success. His name resonated in every boardroom, his influence spanning across industries, establishing him as one of the most formidable CEOs in the nation. Golf was one of the rare reprieves he permitted himself. It transcended mere pastime, it served as a refuge for him, a means to escape the relentless pressures of his dominion. The secluded course he often visited was elite, enveloped by pristine landscapes and the serene buzz of opulence. He had navigated this course countless times, and today was meant to unfold just like any other. With precision, he prepared for his next shot, his gaze fixed on the ball, shutting out all distractions. His grip was steady, his posture impeccable, and just as he was poised to swing, a faint voice pierced the silence. "Pardon me, good sir." Nicholas halted, taken aback by the unforeseen disruption. He pivoted, anticipating the sight of a staff member, maybe a representative from the clubhouse. A few feet away stood 2 small children, a boy and a girl, both about 6 years old. With deep brown eyes and chestnut-colored hair, their features were strikingly alike, unmistakably marking them as siblings. He furrowed his brow, perplexed by their arrival. Typically, children were not permitted on the course unless they were accompanied by members, and he had certainly not extended any invitations. He lowered his club and observed them closely, taking note of the anxious manner in which they shifted on their feet. "How may I assist you?" he inquired, his tone steady yet assertive. The children shared a glance, and after a moment of uncertainty, the girl moved ahead, her tiny hands balled into fists at her sides. She said, "You're our dad." The word struck him with the force of a hammer, delivering an unexpected jolt to his chest. For a fleeting instant, he questioned whether he had misunderstood her, yet the boy affirmed with a nod, his demeanor equally grave. "You're our father," he reiterated. Nicholas sensed the earth tremble beneath his feet. His thoughts raced in search of a coherent rationale. This must be an error. An unfortunate miscommunication. Maybe they confused him with another person. He was childless. He had always remained single, never finding himself in a circumstance that might have led to him unknowingly becoming a father. He spoke with caution, his voice steady even as the confusion churned within him. "You must have me mistaken for someone else," he said. "Where might your parents be?" The girl's lips sealed tightly, while the boy cast his gaze downward, fixated on the earth beneath him. A weight hung in the air between them before the girl spoke once more, her voice softer this time. "Our mother has left us," she said. Nicholas hardly took note of the words as the boy retrieved an item from his tiny backpack. He moved nearer, extending a photograph with hands that shook slightly. Nicholas paused momentarily before reaching for it. As soon as his gaze fell upon the image, he felt a tightness in his throat. It was an image of him, much younger, grinning next to a woman he had once been intimately familiar with. Isabella. Memories surged forth, crashing over him like a relentless tide. He had encountered Isabella years prior, during a time when he was in the midst of forging his career, steadily ascending toward success. Their connection was passionate yet ephemeral, concluding as swiftly as it started. He departed, consumed by his aspirations, oblivious to the possibility of a shared future with her. He was completely unaware that she was expecting. His eyes darted back to the children. Their eyes, the contours of their faces, it was unmistakable. Those belonged to Isabella. And if they belonged to her, then they belonged to him. His voice emerged with a gritty edge, teetering on the brink of uncertainty. I was unaware. The girl, Sophie, regarded him with an expression that seemed far too profound for someone so young. We understand, she stated plainly. Nicholas's fingers clenched around the photograph, the fragile facade of his reality beginning to splinter. He devoted his existence to meticulously strategizing each step, managing every factor with precision. Yet here he was, amidst the vast expanse of the golf course, two children gazing up at him, anticipation hanging in the air, and in that moment, a chilling realization washed over him. After years of certainty, he found himself completely at a loss, unsure of his next move. Nicholas lingered in his office, his gaze fixed on the photograph cradled in his hands, as though the intensity of his stare could bend the fabric of reality itself. The last day had unfolded in a manner that felt utterly dreamlike. He strolled onto the golf course anticipating a serene afternoon, only to leave with the shocking revelation that he had two 6-year-old children he had never known were part of his life. Sophie and Liam. Their names resonated in his thoughts, evoking a sense of both alienation and an odd familiarity simultaneously. He remained mostly silent following their revelation, too shocked to craft a suitable reply. He instructed them to hold on as he made a few phone calls, requiring a moment to gather his thoughts about the recent events. Yet here he was, alone in his grand office, gazing out at the city he had tirelessly worked to dominate, and an unsettling truth dawned on him: no level of wealth, power, or influence could ready him for this moment. Daniel Grayson, his assistant, entered the office with characteristic precision, placing a folder on the desk before stepping back with deliberate poise. Daniel had been with Nicholas for a considerable time, allowing him to pick up on the subtle signs of trouble, and today, the palpable tension in the atmosphere was unmistakable. I made a few calls, sir, Daniel said, maintaining a professional yet careful tone. Everything checks out. Isabella Carter, their mother, departed from this world 3 months prior. Cancer claimed her life. She remained unmarried, with no documented long-term relationships. As far as I know, she never tried to reach out to you. Nicholas let out a sharp breath, dragging his hand down his face. He had already had his suspicions, but hearing it confirmed made the weight of it all feel even more burdensome. Isabella had been unwell, and he had been completely unaware. Was she intending to share this with him? Or had she concluded that it was best for him to remain in the dark? Daniel pressed on, his voice steady. The children were currently in the care of a family friend, yet there was no legal guardian appointed for them. If you were to challenge custody, it wouldn't pose much of a challenge. Considering your position and assets, securing full custody could happen in just a few weeks. Nicholas glanced up abruptly. Custody. Daniel held his gaze firmly. Sir, they have no one else. The courts will seek the nearest living relative, and that's you. Nicholas reclined in his chair, clutching its arms as he struggled to comprehend the gravity of that declaration. Custody. Obligation. Fatherhood. These were concepts he had never linked to his own identity. He had dedicated his life to sidestepping connections, making certain that nothing and no one could ever hinder his pace. Now, 2 children had entered his world and completely upended that belief. He wasn't a father. He wasn't suited for it. Yet, when he gazed into Sophie's resolute eyes and sensed Liam's subtle uncertainty, something within him had fractured. They had turned to him because they had no other refuge. They had anticipated his rejection, bracing themselves for the cold dismissal of a distant stranger, unbound by any sense of duty. Where are they now? Nicholas inquired, his tone softer than it had been. Daniel stole a glance at his watch. They remain in the hotel suite you organized for them. I ensured they had all necessities, clothes, food, anything they might need for the coming days. Nicholas nodded absent-mindedly, his thoughts drifting to other matters. He had been so absorbed in collecting facts, in confirming the reality, that he hadn't paused to reflect on the feelings of those children. He had left them in a hotel room with unfamiliar faces, in a strange environment, after they had just lost their only parent. And what had he done? He had returned to his office, attempting to rationalize it in a manner that aligned with his orderly existence. It was all wrong. Nothing about this felt right. After a moment of contemplation, he rose, taking his jacket from the chair. I need to see them, he murmured, more to himself than to Daniel. Daniel nodded, stepping aside as Nicholas made his way toward the elevator. Should I have legal start the custody paperwork? Daniel inquired just before Nicholas entered. Nicholas paused for a brief moment, then shook his head. Not yet, he said. I need to understand what they require from me first. As the elevator doors slid shut, he exhaled slowly. Uncertainty loomed over him, he felt ill-equipped for the role of a father. Doubts crept in, leaving him to wonder if he could truly embrace that responsibility. For the first time in his life, that uncertainty didn't drive him away. Instead, it propelled him onward. Nicholas emerged from the sleek black car parked in front of the five-star hotel, his thoughts still swirling as he navigated through the opulent lobby. He hardly registered the polished marble floors, the gentle strains of classical music wafting through the air, or the quiet conversations of other guests drifting past. His attention was fixed on a single thought, the two children awaiting him upstairs. He was oblivious to the reality that lay ahead. He had devoted the last few hours to grappling with the reality of being a father, but now the true test awaited him. What words could he offer them? How was he meant to conduct himself? These were not mere transactions, nor were they subordinates to be directed. They were two 6-year-olds, freshly bereaved of their mother, gazing at him as their final beacon of hope. As he stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the top floor, he tightened his jaw, striving to maintain his composure. His life had been constructed on a foundation of confidence and control. He could navigate billion-dollar deals and intense boardroom confrontations, yet the prospect of confronting two children left him feeling more disquieted than he would ever acknowledge. The elevator doors parted, revealing Daniel, who stood patiently in the hallway. Wordlessly, he guided Nicholas toward the suite's double doors, motioning for him to enter. They've maintained their silence, Daniel remarked. A touch of overwhelm lingered, yet all was well in hand. Nicholas paused briefly, then confidently pushed the doors open and entered. The suite unfolded before him, generous in space and tastefully adorned, with grand windows that framed the city skyline beyond. The setting was one that would typically inspire wonder, yet when Nicholas's gaze fell upon the two small figures nestled on the couch, he realized that opulence held no significance for them at this moment. Sophie and Liam were huddled together, their tiny forms radiating tension. Sophie, with her arms crossed and legs swinging gently, fixated her attention on the ground. Liam held a stuffed bear tightly in his hands, his grasp firm as if he were clinging to the last remnants of comfort he possessed. When they glanced up and noticed him standing there, a swirl of emotions flickered across their faces, uncertainty, curiosity, and something more profound. Nicholas cleared his throat, an unexpected wave of unpreparedness washing over him. Hey! It wasn't much, but it was the best he could manage. Sophie was the first to speak. You came. Her tone held no accusation, merely a straightforward observation. It was as though she had been uncertain about his arrival. Nicholas stepped forward, fighting the instinct to bury his hands in his pockets like an anxious youth. Naturally, I did. Liam remained silent, his gaze fixed on Nicholas, scrutinizing him in a manner that made Nicholas feel as though he were the one under examination. After a moment of hesitation, Nicholas let out a sigh and settled into the armchair opposite them. I realize this is unexpected, he confessed. For everyone involved. Sophie tilted her head. You were unaware of our existence, weren't you? He might have chosen to deceive. He might have chosen words to enhance his image, to sidestep the reality. Yet, gazing at them, so fragile yet already burdened by grief, he recognized their right to the truth. No, he replied softly. I was unaware. Liam finally found his voice. Would you have wished for that? The inquiry struck deeper than Nicholas anticipated. He opened his mouth to respond, but for the first time, he found himself at a loss for words. The reality was, he had no answers. Would he have chosen to stay if Isabella had confided in him? Would he have embraced fatherhood? Or would he have remained the same driven individual he once was, relentless in his pursuits and resistant to pause for anything? I don't know, he ultimately confessed. Yet, I realize that at this moment, I hold a choice in my hands. I am determined to make the right decision. Sophie's gaze sharpened just a bit. What does that imply? Nicholas ran a hand through his hair. It implies that I wish to understand you better. I want to ensure that you're all right. And if you'll allow me, I'd like to explore what unfolds next alongside you. Liam gazed down at his stuffed bear, gently running a finger over its frayed fabric. We don't have any other place to turn. Those words caused a constriction in Nicholas's chest. You don't need to, he stated, his voice resolute. You have me now. The atmosphere grew still, yet a subtle change lingered. It wasn't a warm embrace of acceptance, nor a cold dismissal. Instead, it hovered in a delicate balance, an unvoiced understanding to explore the unfolding journey ahead. Sophie finally released a breath, uncrossing her arms. I suppose we'll find out if you have any talent for this. Nicholas responded with a quiet, airy laugh. I suppose we will. For the first time since meeting them, the fear of failure no longer held the greatest terror for him. Instead, it was the realization that he might genuinely desire to be a father, coupled with the unsettling truth that, for the first time in his life, he had something to lose. Nicholas had encountered numerous obstacles throughout his life, aggressive business takeovers, high-stakes negotiations, and fierce rivals intent on undermining him. Yet, nothing could have equipped him for the reality of waking up to find two 6-year-olds now residing in his home. Following their discussion in the hotel suite, he had come to a resolution. He refused to allow them to linger in a hotel for an extended period, and he definitely wouldn't let them feel like mere visitors. Thus, without a second thought, he welcomed them into his penthouse, a space that had previously served as his refuge. The following morning, as he entered the kitchen, he became acutely aware of how drastically his life had transformed in under a day. Typically, his mornings unfolded with a serene predictability. He would rise, savor the coffee brewed by his housekeeper, peruse the financial reports on his tablet, and mentally gear up for the day ahead. However, today, the kitchen buzzed with an unexpected energy. Sophie perched at the counter, her legs swinging playfully as she nibbled on a piece of toast, her curly brown hair tousled in delightful disarray. Beside her, Liam fought off the remnants of sleep, his eyes still heavy, yet his tiny fingers grasped a spoon, stirring a bowl of cereal with a languid motion. A stuffed bear sat companionably next to his plate, as though it too were waiting for breakfast. Nicholas lingered in the doorway, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his mind. It was Sophie who spotted him first. Morning, she greeted, her words muffled by a mouthful of toast. Liam remained engrossed in his cereal, oblivious to Nicholas's presence. Nicholas cleared his throat. Morning. He felt uncertain about whether he should join them. This was unfamiliar territory for him. He could seal a billion-dollar deal in less than an hour, yet he found himself completely at a loss regarding the etiquette of sharing breakfast with children. Sophie regarded him with an insightful gaze, as if she sensed his discomfort in the situation. You don't eat breakfast? She inquired. Nicholas paused, then moved towards the coffee maker. I typically stick to coffee. Sophie grimaced. That's dull. Liam finally raised his gaze. Coffee is terrible. Nicholas grinned slyly. At the age of 6, it happens. Sophie placed her toast aside and leaned in closer. So, what comes next? Nicholas turned to meet their gaze, clutching his coffee mug as if it held the solutions he sought. Now, we will sort everything out. I've already discussed school options for both of you with my team, and will ensure you have all the necessary resources. Liam frowned. We've already been to school. I understand, Nicholas replied. But that was in the past. You're here now, and I want to ensure you're in a safe place, one where you feel at ease. Sophie tilted her head. Are we staying? The question lingered in the air longer than it ought to have. Nicholas could see it in their eyes, they were seeking reassurance, longing to know they weren't merely fleeting figures in his life. He understood the words they needed to hear, yet the burden of those words felt more substantial than anything he had ever borne. Yes, he finally said. You're staying. Sophie offered a faint smile, yet Liam remained unresponsive for a moment. He simply nudged his cereal bowl away and cast his gaze downward at his bear. What if you change your mind? Liam asked softly. Nicholas placed his coffee down and approached, crouching to meet the boy's gaze. I won't. Liam remained unconvinced. You were unaware of our existence before. What if you choose not to want us now? Nicholas experienced a sudden ache in his chest. He had dedicated his entire existence to upholding commitments in the world of commerce, never once entering an agreement he wasn't confident he could fulfill. But this was something else entirely. This transcended mere contracts or negotiations. This was a matter of trust, a fragile thing that had been shattered in the past. He inhaled deeply. I was unaware of your existence before, and that cannot be altered. But I understand you now. And I'm not leaving. Liam finally locked eyes with him, probing his expression for any hint of deceit. Whatever he observed seemed sufficient, for after a lengthy silence, he offered a slight nod and drew his stuffed bear nearer. Nicholas rose, sensing an unfamiliar heaviness in his chest. Duty. It was an unexpected turn of events, something he had never desired until now, yet it loomed before him. Sophie shattered the stillness. So, if we're staying, does that mean we get our own rooms? Nicholas let out a soft laugh. Absolutely. I've got folks already working on the arrangements. Sophie beamed. Interesting. Could mine be purple? Nicholas arched an eyebrow. Purple. Indeed, she remarked with an air of certainty, as though it were the most evident truth imaginable. It's my favorite color. Nicholas offered a sly grin. Understood. Sophie reached for her toast once more. And it might be a good idea to consider getting a dog as well. Nicholas sputtered on his coffee. Let's proceed carefully. Sophie chuckled, and Liam managed a faint smile at last. It may have been small, yet it held significance. Nicholas breathed out, coming to the understanding that this marked merely the start. He had constructed his existence around dominance, authority, and riches, but in this moment, none of that held any weight. What mattered was sitting in front of him, 2 kids who were now his responsibility, whether he was ready for it or not. For the first time in his life, he wasn't preoccupied with his next business move. Instead, he was contemplating the true essence of being a father. Nicholas had always taken pride in his ability to adjust to any circumstance. No challenge felt insurmountable, no issue too intricate. He dedicated years to constructing an empire through swift, resolute actions, consistently remaining a step ahead of the competition. However, nothing, truly nothing, could have equipped him for the whirlwind that accompanied the presence of 2 6-year-olds in his home. The morning following their inaugural breakfast together, he anticipated a day of ease. He had scheduled meetings to address their education, enlisted a specialist to manage their requirements, and even made certain that their rooms were crafted precisely to their liking. He believed that managing logistics would suffice, that having a solid structure and organization would simplify everything. Yet, by the afternoon, he came to understand just how profoundly he had misjudged the reality of having children in his life. His penthouse, once a sanctuary of order and precision, now seemed to belong to another world entirely. Sophie had transformed his living room into an art studio, with crayons and papers strewn across his elegant marble coffee table. Meanwhile, Liam had stumbled upon the smart home system and was eagerly pressing buttons on the wall panel, experimenting with the lighting and temperature to see the effects. Every few seconds, the atmosphere in the room fluctuated from warm to cold, from dim to glaringly bright. Nicholas rubbed his temples, observing the transformation of his once orderly space into a mild disarray. "Sophie, must you really spread everything out on the table?" he inquired, glancing at the scattered drawings before her. Sophie looked up, completely unfazed. "I'm creating an image for you." That caused him to stop. He hadn't anticipated that. "For me?" She nodded, presenting a sheet of paper adorned with a drawing of 3 stick figures, 1 tall and 2 short. At the top, in bold, uneven letters, she had inscribed, "Our new family." Nicholas gazed at the drawing, an unexpected tightness forming in his throat. Words eluded him. Just as he was about to find his voice, Liam's voice rang out from the other side of the room. "Hey, what does this button do?" Nicholas turned just in time to see the living room blinds suddenly rise, then lower again, then rise once more in rapid succession. Liam, captivated by the spectacle, pressed the button again. "Liam," Nicholas said, maintaining a calm tone. "Cease your incessant button pressing." Liam paused, then regarded him with a look of feigned innocence. "Why?" "It's entertaining." Nicholas let out a weary sigh as he approached the panel, deftly disabling the controls. He had no desire for his penthouse to become a dazzling spectacle. Liam's expression shifted, a hint of concern crossing his features. The silence in the room was palpable. Nicholas raised an eyebrow. "I was under the impression that children enjoyed a bit of tranquility." "Not really," Sophie interjected. "Our old house was always filled with sounds. Mom would sing as she cooked, and we had a dog that barked at everything. It was enjoyable." Nicholas found himself at a loss for words. His home had consistently been serene, perhaps overly so. It had never felt devoid of meaning before, but now, standing here with them, he questioned if it always had been. After a moment of quiet, Sophie shifted the conversation. "So, when do we begin school?" Nicholas settled onto the couch, thinking that if he was going to acclimate to this, he might as well attempt to unwind. "I'm exploring several possibilities. It's important to find a school that suits both of you." Liam seemed doubtful. "Do we really need to attend an elite school?" Nicholas asked with a smirk. "Is that an issue?" Liam shrugged, uncertainty evident. "I'm not sure. We've never attended an elite institution before." Nicholas reclined, coming to the understanding that the concept of opulence, which had always been commonplace for him, was entirely unfamiliar to them. It doesn't need to be extravagant. It simply must be exceptional. Sophie drummed her pencil against the table. "Will you lead us there?" On the first day, Nicholas paused, then gave a nod. "Sure, I'll take you." She appeared pleased with that, going back to her drawing. Liam, however, appeared to be holding back. Nicholas sensed there was something troubling him. "What is it?" he inquired. Liam toyed with the stuffed bear resting in his lap, glancing up with a curious expression. "Are we staying for real? Or just for now?" The question caused Nicholas to hesitate. He sensed that, beneath their light-hearted demeanor, both were bracing for the moment he might deem this situation overwhelming and choose to send them away. Something within him constricted. "You're staying," he asserted with conviction. "For real." Liam regarded him intently for a prolonged moment before offering a subtle nod, as if weighing the trustworthiness of his words. Sophie, in contrast, beamed with approval. Excellent. As I envisioned the decor for my room, Nicholas let out a chuckle and shook his head. Naturally, you did. As the day unfolded, the turmoil persisted, yet an unexpected clarity emerged, something Nicholas had not recognized he was lacking. The joy, the vibrancy, the subtle yet profound instances of connection. His existence had been constructed on the foundation of control, but these two children had stepped into his life and dismantled every barrier he had erected around himself. Rather than attempting to mend it, he found himself contemplating whether, perhaps, he was content with leaving it as is. Nicholas had devoted years to the conviction that mastery was essential for achievement. His existence had been meticulously organized, each choice measured, every action intentional. In a matter of days, 2 6-year-olds had entirely unraveled that control. He found himself torn between frustration and admiration for how effortlessly Sophie and Liam had infiltrated his life, not through demands or expectations, but merely by being themselves in a way that rendered him unable to overlook them. That morning, he awoke to the sound of muffled giggles echoing from down the hall. Initially, he believed it was a figment of his imagination, but as he propped himself up in bed and focused intently, the noise sharpened into clarity. It was accompanied by the unmistakable shuffle of tiny feet, followed by an eerie stillness. Nicholas exhaled deeply, running a hand over his face before rising from the bed. Since Sophie and Liam had moved in, he hadn't required an alarm clock. His previously serene mornings had transformed into a realm of delightful unpredictability, and despite his attempts to feign annoyance, he found that he didn't mind it as much as he had anticipated. Donning a robe, he emerged from his bedroom and traced the soft murmurs echoing down the hallway. The sound emanated from the kitchen. He paused at the threshold, absorbing the tableau before him. Sophie and Liam were positioned by the kitchen island, their backs to him as they leaned in closely over something intriguing. The countertop lay beneath a dusting of flour and sugar, marred by the remnants of a syrup mishap. Liam clutched a measuring cup, his tiny fingers wrapped around it with determination as he attempted to pour an ingredient into a mixing bowl. Beside him, Sophie wore a concentrated look as she cracked an egg, though the execution left much to be desired. Half of the shell tumbled into the bowl, and rather than fishing it out, she simply mixed it in. Nicholas folded his arms, leaning against the doorframe. Do I really want to know what's going on here? Both children startled at the sound of his voice. Sophie spun around first, her face a mix of remorse and thrill. Liam followed, his eyes wide as if he had just been discovered in the act of wrongdoing. We're preparing breakfast, Sophie declared with pride. Nicholas raised an eyebrow. Are you? Liam glanced at the chaos before him, then met Nicholas's gaze once more. We were making an effort. Nicholas let out a breath, moving closer to assess the situation. The pancakes, or whatever they were intended to be, appeared to be a complete wreck, the batter resembling a chaotic jumble. The stovetop remained cold, indicating that no cooking had taken place, and Nicholas felt a sense of relief. He massaged his temples. Allow me to clarify this situation. Rather than simply waiting for breakfast, you chose to wreak havoc in my kitchen. Sophie placed her hands on her hips. It's not ruined. We're merely exploring. A subtle smirk played on Nicholas's lips, despite the fact that he ought to have felt irritated. He ought to have been admonishing them for their chaotic antics and their reckless handling of unfamiliar tools. Yet, here he was, captivated by their enthusiastic faces, particularly as Liam nervously toyed with his measuring cup, seemingly intent on perfecting his technique. A sigh escaped him as he shook his head in disbelief. All right, shift aside. Sophie frowned. Why? Because if you're going to prepare breakfast in my kitchen, you better do it properly, Nicholas said, rolling up his sleeves. Liam's eyes widened in surprise. You know how to cook? Nicholas replied with a smirk. Surprised? Sophie nodded. You don't seem like the cooking type. Nicholas let out a soft chuckle. I don't engage in this frequently, but I possess a fair amount of knowledge. He extended his hand toward the mixing bowl, a slight grimace crossing his face at the texture. First and foremost, one does not simply crack eggs and abandon the shells within. Sophie shrugged. They're insignificant. No one would pay attention. Nicholas shot her a knowing glance before meticulously extracting the fragments of eggshell. Believe me. They certainly would. For the next 20 minutes, he led them through the process with precision, demonstrating how to blend the ingredients, how to pour the perfect amount of batter into the pan, and how to flip a pancake with finesse. Initially, they were doubtful, but as the pancake began to form, their enthusiasm grew. When Liam managed to flip his first pancake flawlessly, he beamed at Nicholas. I accomplished it. Nicholas gave a nod of approval. Quite impressive. Sophie, eager to keep up, swiftly turned hers over, but it ended up teetering on the edge of the pan. She let out an exasperated sigh. Mine's ruined. Nicholas wore a sly grin. It's still good to eat. Sophie scowled, her gaze shifting to the oddly shaped pancake. Indeed. It seems to have a certain distinctiveness. Let's refer to it as imaginative culinary art, Nicholas remarked. Once the pancakes were finally done, they gathered at the kitchen island, plates piled high with syrup-soaked delights. It wasn't flawless. The pancakes were irregular, some slightly charred, and flour still lingered on the countertops. Yet, as Sophie savored her first bite and beamed, and as Liam enthusiastically plunged into his meal, Nicholas experienced an unexpected sensation. This moment, this little, chaotic, entirely spontaneous morning, felt authentic. It transcended mere transactions. It wasn't about strategy. It was simply them, navigating their way through together. Sophie glanced at him between bites. Are we going to cook again? Nicholas asked, raising an eyebrow. If you can promise not to turn my kitchen into a disaster zone, then maybe, Liam replied with a grin. Well, that's unlikely. Nicholas let out a sigh, shaking his head with a hint of a smirk. Indeed. Perhaps not. As they concluded their breakfast, a realization dawned on him. He had dedicated years to constructing a life centered on achievement, affluence, and rigor. In this moment, as he sat with two children who had unexpectedly woven themselves into the fabric of his life, he found himself pondering whether this was, in fact, the essence of existence. Nicholas had always held the conviction that change was a force to be mastered. In his professional realm, he was the architect of decisions, the one who set the parameters. He meticulously crafted his approach, considering each action with care. Yet, this was an unforeseen twist. Sophie and Liam swept into his existence like a tempest, disrupting the status quo, and strangely, he found himself embracing the chaos rather than seeking to restore order. He wasn't seeking a way out. He was gradually discovering how to adapt. A week after their arrival, Nicholas concluded it was time to take them out. He couldn't quite pinpoint why it seemed so significant, yet an inner voice insisted it was essential. They had been confined to his penthouse, adapting to an unfamiliar existence, and he believed they deserved a respite. That Saturday morning, he gathered them from their rooms, discovering Sophie sprawled on her bed, engrossed in a book, while Liam sat on the floor, silently constructing something with Legos. Get dressed, Nicholas instructed. We're going out. Sophie immediately sat up, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. Where? Nicholas smirked, a hint of mischief in his eyes. You'll see. Liam hesitated, casting a glance at Sophie before rising slowly to his feet. Is it an upscale venue? Nicholas arched an eyebrow. Would you prefer it to be? Liam shook his head. Not particularly. Then no. Just wear whatever feels right for you. It was an odd experience, observing them engage with the world beyond the meticulously crafted space he had designed for them. He led them to a sprawling park, vibrant with families, laughter, and a lively chaos that felt entirely new to him. He had never frequented such places, never found a reason to, but as he observed Sophie dart ahead, her joy radiating with each step, he recognized that this experience was not just foreign to them, but to him as well. Liam remained more subdued, staying close to Nicholas as they strolled along the meandering paths. The boy moved with care, his eyes keenly watching, his mind always weighing options before taking action. Nicholas saw that quality in him. It was a skill he had honed over time, the knack for assessing circumstances prior to involvement. "You don't have to stay right next to me the whole time," Nicholas said after a few minutes. Liam shrugged. "I don't know what to do." Nicholas breathed out, coming to the understanding that for a child who had always known a much more confined and familiar environment, this level of freedom could be quite daunting. "Then let's figure it out," he said, surveying the park. His gaze settled on a small booth where kites were available for rent. He smirked. "Have you ever flown a kite?" Liam shook his head, observing Nicholas as he approached the man, exchanged a bill, and received a vibrant blue kite with a long tail. Nicholas returned to Liam, kneeling slightly as he presented it to him. "Do you want to give it a shot?" Liam paused for a moment, then cautiously took hold of the string. Nicholas assisted him in refining his grip, then pointed towards the expansive field. "Okay, let's do this. You sprint, and as the breeze seizes it, release it." Liam scowled. "What if it fails?" Nicholas grinned. "Then we attempt once more." It required several attempts, a handful of exasperated sighs, and fleeting moments of uncertainty, but then, in an instant, the kite soared, embracing the wind as Liam's fingers clenched around the string. His eyes grew wide, his lips parting slightly in wonder as he observed it ascend further and further. Nicholas stood beside him, hands tucked into his pockets, observing the boy's expression more than the kite soaring above. "Not bad," he remarked. Liam grinned, and for the first time since their encounter, Nicholas noticed a glimmer of confidence in his eyes. Hours slipped away in the park. Sophie spotted a cluster of children engaged in a game of tag and eagerly leaped into the fray, her laughter ringing out across the vast expanse. Meanwhile, Liam focused on his kite, gaining confidence with each moment that passed. Nicholas lingered close, watching over them, ensuring their well-being, yet an unforeseen warmth enveloped him, a feeling of satisfaction he hadn't experienced in ages. As the sun dipped below the horizon, they indulged in ice cream from a quaint vendor at the park's entrance. Sophie opted for strawberry, Liam selected chocolate, and after some playful coaxing from Sophie, Nicholas settled on vanilla. They sat on a bench, the children savoring their ice cream as Nicholas absorbed the scene around him. After a moment, Sophie glanced up at him, her expression contemplative. "You don't smile much, do you?" Nicholas arched an eyebrow in response. "I smile." Liam shook his head. "Not quite." Nicholas let out a breath, savoring a small bite of his ice cream. "I suppose I just never found a reason to." Sophie tilted her head, intrigued. "And now?" Nicholas locked eyes with her, then shifted his attention to Liam, who was absorbed in his ice cream yet clearly attentive. "Now," Nicholas spoke deliberately, "I think I might be piecing it together." Sophie beamed as she polished off the remainder of her cone. "That's great. I believe a smile would enhance your appearance." Nicholas laughed softly, shaking his head. "I'll remember that." As they strolled back to the car, Sophie danced ahead while Liam lingered nearby. Nicholas came to a realization. This was the essence of life, not merely success or power, but this feeling. Instances that flowed freely, moments that were simply there, brimming with joy, comfort, and the surprising sensation of connection. For the first time, he found himself not solely creating for his own sake, but also crafting something for others. Nicholas had always been a man of action, never one to dwell on what had come before. His existence revolved around progress, perpetually advancing, relentlessly pursuing the next achievement. The past held no value for him. It felt like a futile endeavor, merely a diversion. Yet now, As he sat in his living room, observing Sophie and Liam bicker over which film to select, he couldn't help but reflect on the series of events that had brought him to this point. It had been a month since they had entered his world. A month had passed since he gazed into two pairs of familiar brown eyes and understood that everything he believed about his world had shifted. He had lived his life convinced that he didn't require anyone, that connections only complicated matters. Yet, here he stood, no longer existing for himself but for two little souls who had effortlessly unraveled every aspect of him. "Why can't we just watch both?" Liam asked, frustration evident as Sophie clutched two DVD cases, her demeanor resolute. "Because The Lion King is far superior to Toy Story," Sophie countered, brandishing the case in front of Liam. "No, it's not," Liam retorted. "Woody and Buzz are fantastic." Nicholas, who had been silently watching their exchange, finally let out a sigh. "Just flip a coin." Sophie and Liam turned to him at the same time. "What?" Sophie asked. Nicholas pulled a coin from his pocket and held it up. "Heads for The Lion King, tails for Toy Story." Sophie narrowed her eyes. "And we both have to agree to go with whatever wins." Nicholas nodded. "That's how decisions work. You don't always get what you want, but at least it's fair." Liam crossed his arms. "Fine." Nicholas flipped the coin, catching it in his palm before turning it over on the back of his hand. "Tails," he announced. Liam grinned in victory while Sophie groaned dramatically, flopping onto the couch. "Ugh, fine. But I get to pick next time." Nicholas smirked. "That's fair." As Liam put the movie in, Nicholas glanced at Sophie, who was still sulking. He nudged her foot with his. "Hey. You okay?" She huffed. "Yeah. I just hate losing." Nicholas let out a soft laugh. "Indeed, I can understand." Sophie glanced up at him, her lips curling into a faint smile. "You lose a lot." Nicholas breathed out. "Not anymore. However, in my younger days, I felt differently. I despised it as well." Sophie straightened up slightly. "What did you lose at?" Nicholas paused, caught off guard. Discussing his past was unfamiliar territory for him. Rarely did anyone inquire about it, and he had never felt compelled to share. As Sophie gazed at him with genuine curiosity, and Liam took a seat on the couch, anticipating the start of the movie, he felt compelled to respond. "I wasn't always at the top of my game," Nicholas confessed. "At your age, I wasn't the brightest or the quickest. There were many areas where I struggled. Each time I stumbled, I reminded myself that I needed to put in more effort. I believed that with enough dedication, I could ensure that no one would surpass me again." Sophie tilted her head, curiosity piqued. "And did it work?" she asked. Nicholas smirked, a glint of mischief in his eyes. "Depends on how you look at it," he replied, leaving the question hanging in the air. "I ceased to lose, yet I also ceased to engage in games solely for enjoyment. Victory transformed into the sole focus." Sophie pondered this briefly, then shrugged. "That seems rather dull." Nicholas laughed. "Indeed, it was." Liam's voice broke the silence from his place on the couch. "So, you no longer care about winning?" Nicholas locked eyes with him. "I still care. Yet, I've come to realize that certain matters hold greater significance." Sophie beamed. "Is it about us?" Nicholas sensed a tightening in his chest. Years had been devoted to perfecting the skill of maintaining distance, ensuring that no one could breach the barriers he had erected. Yet, these two had entered his life and effortlessly dismantled that wall. "Yeah," he murmured softly. "Just like you." Sophie's smile grew broader before she redirected her attention to the screen, feeling content. Liam remained silent, yet he shot a glance at Nicholas that conveyed a sense of shared understanding. As the film began, Nicholas settled into the couch, enveloped by a tranquility he hadn't realized he craved. He had dedicated his life to the pursuit of greatness, striving to construct an empire and achieve victory at any price. Yet now, nestled between two children who had unexpectedly become his universe, he understood that it was these simple, ordinary moments that held the greatest significance. For the first time in his life, he found himself not in pursuit of something grander. He wasn't gazing forward to the next obstacle. For the first time, he was precisely in the place he desired to be. The conclusion of this narrative resonates deeply, as it eschews elaborate displays or shocking turns, finding significance in its straightforwardness. Nicholas Winslow begins as an individual who measures his worth through success, affluence, and the illusion of control over his existence. However, as the plot progresses, he is compelled to face an unforeseen reality. True fulfillment arises not from authority or monetary superiority, but from the relationships we cultivate with those around us. The allure of this transformation lies in its gradual nature. Nicholas doesn't instantly morph into an ideal father, nor do Sophie and Liam place their trust in him right away. Instead, their bond unfolds through subtle interactions, communal breakfasts, cozy movie nights, and the journey of coexisting. These seemingly ordinary experiences profoundly transform him, revealing that love, trust, and family cannot be dictated or bargained, they must be earned. By the final chapter, Nicholas evolves from merely accepting his role as a father to genuinely desiring to embrace it. This marks the most significant change. He no longer views Sophie and Liam as a burden or an unwelcome interruption to his meticulously organized life. Rather, he understands that they are the essence of his fulfillment. The man who previously existed solely for the next transaction now discovers significance in the simplest moments, like tossing a coin for a movie choice or witnessing the joy on a child's face after a kite takes flight. This conclusion resonates deeply as it embodies authenticity. Nicholas doesn't undergo a fantastical transformation, instead, he evolves in a manner that feels true and deserved. The narrative concludes with an uplifting sentiment, illustrating that change isn't about abandoning one's identity, but rather about uncovering the essence of who you were destined to become.